Welcome back to the podcast, guys. My name is Alan,
My name is Jorge.
and we have a special guest today in the house, man. We have Manny Martinez with the Birth of Happiness in the house, man. We got a new album. Uh, I'm sorry, correct me. This is a vinyl, correct?
This is a vinyl copy of the record. Yes.
We have a vinyl copy of the record, and then along with the CD, I don't know what we
The
did with the
CD's
CD.
back here.
Oh, we got the CD posted in the back right there.
Got some mugs.
Got some mugs right here, some special merch. Thank you for bringing gifts, man. This is awesome.
Oh, and a
Absolutely.
T-shirt, dude. Where's the T-shirt at?
Oh, and the T-shirt.
Here, I
Grab
gotta
the
bring the
T-shirt.
T-shirt. Yeah. Come on, Alan. I can do. Where's yours?
Jorge had to get an XXL. He went up a couple sizes.
I did have to get an XXL now. Check it out, guys.
Bam, let's go. So yeah, man, let's get started. Let's get started from the beginning. We were talking a little bit before we were on camera, and you were saying that you weren't raised here in Salem.
No, I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland.
Bam, East Coast in the house, man. That's awesome. First East Coast guest we have.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Very good. Yeah, it's an interesting story. What brought me out here? Born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. I lived in Boston for a while too. I went to college in Boston, Berklee College of Music. Ended up moving back to Baltimore after college until I was about 29 years old, and then I moved to Salem. Of all places, I landed in Salem.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What brought you to Salem?
My plan at the moment was to go to Western Oregon University to get a master's degree in music. But honestly, the thing that made me jump over to the other side of the country was to do a very cliche alcoholic move, which is to try to change geographical relocation in order to solve your problems. And it didn't exactly work. A big part of my story is a recovery story. I've been sober for a little over 5 years now. And when I was in Baltimore at age 29, things had basically fallen apart and I needed a fresh start. And I did the cliche musician slash alcoholic move, which was to move to the West Coast and start over and try something different. And that alone certainly did not do the trick because I started drinking again when I first came out here. But fast forward a few years, and 5 years ago, I ended up getting sober. And that's the results that have been seen as far as birth of happiness and my business and everything going well has all happened just in the last 5 years. And it's just kind of remarkable that it ended up being kind of randomly in Salem. But as far as I'm concerned, people ask me, like, why did you come to Salem? And I just say, like, that's where God brought me.
That's a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first off, I want to congratulate you. I saw that April 27th was your 5-year anniversary, so that was just a little bit over a month ago. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
No, that was April 27th was just 5 days ago, right?
It was. It lasted
no,
last
my bad. I
Saturday.
thought we
yeah.
were already in June. No, I'm way off here. But going back, I'm really curious. So what was it like growing up where you grew up?
And Baltimore is very different than Salem or just the West Coast in general. I grew up in the suburbs of Baltimore, so upper middle class kind of neighborhood. I grew up in a pretty affluent neighborhood. I was blessed in that way. I went to a good high school called Delaney High School, which was great because my band instructor was a huge influence in my life. And Baltimore, we were an Orioles fan. Baseball is big there. Later on, the Ravens came, and when the Ravens came, I was like in a junior or senior in high school. That was a huge deal, and they won the Super Bowl pretty quickly too. That was a big deal. So as far as growing up in Baltimore, it's a different vibe on the East Coast just in general. This is true in Boston too, where I also lived. It's a much more fast-paced. People are less polite.
I've heard that.
Yeah, if you're driving, you hear people honking their horns a lot more freely, and using four-letter words. Cursing out the window, and it's a fast-paced. People are more brutally honest about things, and it's a different vibe. You feel the seasons of weather a lot more. But it has its benefits. A lot happens on the East Coast. There's a lot of activity over there that doesn't happen here on the West Coast. So,
Baltimore is pretty big, isn't it?
yeah, I would say it's kind of like Portland.
I was gonna ask if it was bigger than Portland.
Yeah, But it's a very dangerous city. I think when I left, anyways, and I don't think it's gotten any better. I mean, on average, there's a homicide like every day.
I hear that's one of the
Yeah.
most dangerous cities, Baltimore. Yeah.
So for all the problems that we have in Salem, I kind of laugh to myself because people here don't realize how good they have it. I mean, we've definitely got some real problems in Salem, which is something I'd like to talk about too. But it's nothing compared to what you get in Baltimore. I know of people who have had their cars hit by stray bullets in Baltimore.
Yeah, I'm sure that's normal out there.
Yeah, and when I got back from college and moved back for about 5 or 6 years, I would play gigs, just as a musician and be out late and be driving around late hours of the night. You make a wrong turn in Baltimore, like you're praying to God that you get home safe, and it gets pretty scary depending on where you end up. And I've heard a lot of different really scary stories of people that end up in a bad part of town. So again, for all the problems we have in Salem, it's we have it pretty good here. So.
Yeah, could be a lot worse. Did you do sports in high school?
I played baseball all the way until I was like 13 or 14 years old, up until I picked up a guitar for the first time.
Oh.
And until I picked up a guitar, my dream was to be a professional baseball player. And I took to baseball as a young kid. The neighborhood kids were into it, and me and my brother and sister, we would play with the neighborhood kids. And it turned out that me and my brother especially had some talent. And we were in Little League, and we were hardcore baseball fans. The Orioles were good at the time, and we would go to the games. And I was obsessed with baseball and baseball cards and that whole thing until I heard Pink Floyd for the first time, and then ended up getting into the guitar. And the moment that I picked up a guitar, I was like, "This is the thing."
So Pink Floyd did it for you.
Pink Floyd did it for me. I'll never forget. When I was like 12 years old, I walked in to the room. My older sister, was watching the movie version of Pink Floyd, The Wall. Pink Floyd did a film adaptation of their album, The Wall. And I'll never forget walking in, sitting down, watching this film, which is like a pretty crazy film. It's a interesting, artistic, just work of art, really. But I was captivated by the music. And that Christmas, I asked for the CD of The Wall. I got it, and I started listening to it obsessively. And I just became completely obsessed with Pink Floyd and guitar, and that opened the floodgates to my musical journey, basically.
That's awesome. I know we had a DJ, our last DJ that we had on, and the funny thing is, he said something really similar, where he said that he listened to was it Dr. Dre? I think it was a Dr. Dre song, and he said that the beat to the Dr. Dre song, it just kind of, he was like, I gotta do this. I gotta be involved in music, and that's why he got into DJing. And you saying you hearing this Pink Floyd song, you're like, I gotta pick up a guitar. That's awesome how one artist can just change someone's life like that.
Absolutely. And from then on, it was my dream to have a rock band that was similar as far as success goes to a band like Pink Floyd. Not only as far as like playing huge gigs and touring and everything, but they have reached icon status. Like they're in the history books. They will not be forgotten. Yeah. And there's a lot of artists out there who are super successful and doing great, and not to denigrate anything that they've done, but my real test for greatness in music is whether or not you will stand the test of time. And there's people who have, a whole, rack of Grammy awards that I think will probably not even be remembered. And then there's other artists who have zero of any kind of award who are legends, and they will live forever.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Yeah, I think there's a very small amount of people that will be remembered forever like that. Who do you think will be remembered forever?
For what?
Just music-wise.
That's tough.
Any genre, really.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's tough because, who is remembered right now from, let's say, 40s or 50s?
I don't think there was music.
There's always been music.
Like good music like that in the 40s and 50s.
There's always been artists and music.
Like people like Michael Jackson, I think he'll be remembered forever.
But it's because we're living in that era of if 100 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're only living in that radius of I don't know how many generations here and generations there. But you really think people are gonna remember certain artists in 200 years? Probably not, because realistically speaking, music has been around for years. There's been a lot of multiple artists, maybe not mainstream, but it's tough.
I think there will be some that are remembered as long as human beings are around. And for example, I mean, you can look at classical musicians. Like everyone knows the name
that's true.
Beethoven, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone knows the
That's a good
name
point.
Mozart and Bach. The thing that's tricky about like the early 20th century, like the 30s and the 40s, like that was the very beginning of being able to record at any kind of quality. So you don't get a lot of good recordings of music from the 30s and 40s, even though they do exist, and you have a lot of early jazz, and there are some people that are remembered in the jazz world in particular, and also the classical world in the early 20th century. But as far as mainstream music, like what we're talking about, I think the conversation will start with the Beatles and Elvis will be remembered not only because of the music, but just like the icon status and what he did in the culture. More recently, one that always comes to mind is Queen. Like I think their song Bohemian Rhapsody is going to exist forever.
You think
right?
so?
I think so. It's just such an amazing song, and it's iconic, and it will never, I don't think it'll ever be forgotten. There's bands like Pink Floyd again, Led Zeppelin, and others. I think Elton John falls into that icon
definitely.
status. So it's a tricky question, and to me, that's like the ultimate success in the art world is to do something that stands the test of time. And that, to me, is the ultimate dream: is to make a record that is like Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall, and that usually takes multiple attempts.
Sure.
So I'm glad that we got the first one done, and it came out really great. But the goal somewhere down the line is to do something that will really stand the test of time.
That is true, though. Like you said, test of time, because everything comes in waves. You have a good single, a hit, and then probably in 5 years, 2 years, you're kind of like, it was cool at the time, but like what was that song you said?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, that one. See, that one's, I don't even really, I don't even know who Queen is, to be honest. I just know that song and maybe two others, and that's it. But I don't even know the name of the song. But that one's good. That's a classic song, dude. You hear it everywhere. Everywhere you go, you'll probably hear that. You know what you song?
Yeah.
I think Michael Jackson is someone that will be remembered, and the amount of like iconic fame that he had will have something to do with that, and also the dark side of his whole persona too, and all the things that he was accused of.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff from him.
Yeah, so there's the cultural impact that people have on top of the art is something that plays into it, but. Obviously, like the thing to strive for is to just have that piece of art, like a great album that it does for people, like what The Wall did for me. That album was made in 1979. It was probably in the mid 90s or something where I heard that for the first time as a boy. And imagine that, these guys in Pink Floyd make a record, and like 20 years later, or whatever it was, it changed a kid's life. And I know for a fact that it's done that for probably millions of people. I mean, they're one of the great bands of all time, and there's other bands like that. So to put a piece of art out there like that can transform people and inspire people and just make the world a better place. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's like that's what great art does. And we need more of that in today's culture. I mean, we have such a decay in today's culture as far as everything being watered down. And you look at the food and the architecture and everything is just like made to be as easy and simple as possible. And a lot of it is just like uninteresting and fast and simple and convenient.
There's
and
no characters,
exactly.
Nothing. It's modern, but it's I don't know, soulless, I guess.
Exactly. And what the problems we see in today's society, I think, are directly related to a culture that has broken away from things like beauty and art and appreciation for these things, and instead embracing just what is fast and easy and feeling good right at the moment. And I say this in a non-finger wagging kind of way because, again, from age 20 to 34, I was doing exactly that as an active alcoholic. I was just looking for whatever felt the best at the moment. And alcohol is in a incredibly effective way of being able to immediately feel good without actually having to put any effort into anything. And it creates a false reality that, you feel confident and good, and it's not real. And I feel like our whole culture is very alcoholic in a sense, or very addicted anyways. I mean, we have a epidemic of addiction in today's society, not only of drugs and alcohol, and that's a huge part of it. I mean, the addiction to drugs and alcohol is just a unbelievable problem in this country, but you also have addiction to screens and phones, addiction to pornography, addiction to, all kinds of different toxic things like video games, bad movies, and just glorified violence, and just we're indulging in all of the worst things in our society, and we're seeing the results all over the place, out on the streets, the way people treat each other, go on social media, and it's just people are behaving in a horrible way. And it's like, we need some beauty in this world, man. We need more art and appreciation for beauty.
Let me go back a little bit to we were talking about high school, and you were saying that you picked up the guitar when you listened to Pink Floyd when you were 13, 14, and you stopped playing baseball from there, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And were you involved in in school with the guitar, or was that just like outside like an outside activity?
Well, I started my musical journey really when I was in the 4th grade. By playing the trumpet. That was my first instrument, and I was a pretty good trumpet player too. And playing the trumpet was a really important part of my musical development. I played all the way through high school, and I learned how to read music really well, which is very important. Yeah, it's especially difficult on the guitar, and it's more difficult on guitar than other instruments just because of like the physical nature of the guitar, having to look back and forth. It's easy to lose your place in the music versus the trumpet. You kind of just like sit there and you can stare right at the music and keep your place. But also, I had the benefit of experience playing in orchestra, the school orchestra in high school, especially with my band director, Mr. Paxton, who was a real influence on me. And to this day, he's like the epitome in my mind of like what a great man should be. He was a military man, served honorably, and then he got out of the service and went to college and studied psychology, I believe, as well as music education, and became a band director and just a beloved figure in our community. And he touched so many lives. It's one of the great stories that I've ever gotten to be involved in was just, have you ever seen the movie Mr. Holland's Opus about like the band teacher that people just loved? This guy was like that. When he passed away, people traveled from all over the country to pay their respects to him. Just a school teacher, and like 1,000 people, show up to his remembrance. And so having him as a mentor of sorts was huge. And that happened because I was playing the trumpet all the way through high school. And circle back to your question of like, how did guitar come into play? Yes, because I played guitar in the jazz band under the same instructor, Mr. Paxton, and I also was the teacher assistant to the guitar class that was taught by Mr. Paxton, and he didn't know how to play the guitar, and they forced him to teach a guitar class, and he said, "Okay, but only if Manny can be my teacher assistant." And I basically taught that class. So that was a good experience for where I am now as a guitar instructor. My main bread and butter these days is teaching private guitar lessons. And yes, so guitar in high school, in jazz band, and I also had a band with some friends, and we would practice regularly in my parents' basement, and we were pretty decent too. So we played a lot, and and I took private guitar lessons, and all those things combined together got me ready to go to college and study music at the college level.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, learning how to read music for guitar is really hard. I played guitar for a couple years too, and I took private lessons as well. I never really learned how to read music.
Yeah, reading in general as an adult can be kind of tricky. I think a lot of adult students find it very daunting, but I always just remind them, like little kids, like as early as like 3 and 4 years old, learn how to read music. So it's not that difficult. It just takes practice, just like anything else. And I always give my adult students the option as to whether they want to learn to read, because some adult students come to me and they have really limited time to practice, and they just want to strum chords by the campfire, and they're spending their money, so I'm happy to give them what they want. But I always encourage them to do it, right? Yeah. But when it comes to the kids that come to take lessons with me, they don't get a choice. Like, they have to learn how to read. And I stress that, and it's a very valuable skill. And for me as a professional guitar player, being able to read has gotten me a lot of gigs. And there's some gigs that just require you to be able to read. And there's plenty of examples of big rock stars out there and awesome local musicians that can play a ton of different gigs and have a lot of success. But there's a certain kind of gig that requires you to be able to read music, and I get a lot of those gigs. So
I think that's awesome that you require them to learn how to read music. I feel like that's kind of like either feeding someone or teaching someone how to fish. That's a pretty big difference. I think that would make a big difference, because I mean, if you ask me, if you throw a guitar my way, I'll probably not still remember how to play like 2-3 songs maybe. But I mean, you ask me to play anything else, I'm gonna be like, dude, I don't know.
Yeah, and being able to read music as well as write music out is a skill that transcends just the guitar. Now you're learning the language.
This guy's an asshole, dude. Every time that we get together, at get-togethers, and someone has a guitar, this guy's always like, "Oh, this guy knows how to play the guitar," and throws the guitar my way, play something. I'm like, dude, fuck you.
Well, you said you knew how to play. So.
Yeah, 2 or 3 songs.
I'll give you my card at the end, and we can set up some lessons, man.
See, there we go. Yeah, next time you call me out, I'll know how to.
Yeah, I'll create a situation where you'll be looking for that situation so that you can shine, man. Yeah,
for real. So you were in band. Would you get in trouble in high school?
Yeah, I didn't like high school. I had the same issue that I have today, really, where I don't like to be condescended to or pandered to. And with the exception of my band teacher, a lot of the teachers that I had at the time seemed kind of uninspired and not really happy with their jobs. And to an extent, I can understand. And being a teacher is a really, really difficult job. It's underpaid. You're not as appreciated as you are. I would love to see a shift in our society where we pay teachers a lot more with the expectation that we're going to get really good results. But I think a teacher should make probably double what they make. And it's such an important investment in our society to teach our children well. That said, a lot of the teachers I had were just, it was basically like, do what I say or you're in trouble. Yeah. And that didn't motivate me. I always responded to any teacher that had real passion and was able to express the material in a way that was interesting and inspired me to learn. But anytime it was just like, do what I say or you're in trouble, I always had the middle finger attitude ever since I was a little kid. And it's like, oh yeah, well, like, what are you going to do?
I agree.
Do you think that's just because over time they're just burnt out? I mean, you hear this about everybody in every place, and you would call it corporate America, which is it's on the go, work, but you're burned out. As a teacher, it's still their job. You could be passionate for the first 2-3 years that you want to do this, but then I think over time you just get burned out, and it's just like a regular routine, and it's like everything just builds up. I'm not getting paid enough, and next thing you know, you're just kind of, it's not the passion no more, but that's the only thing you know how to do in a way.
Yeah, and as an adult, I can look back and have a lot more sympathy and empathy for these teachers. And again, Baltimore is a very different vibe. It's a tough atmosphere. So I can look back and say, like, yeah, I can totally understand why they were not super inspired. But as a kid, all I was feeling was like, sit down, shut up, and do what we say, or you're in trouble. And like that didn't motivate me. And not only that, I was completely obsessed with the guitar, and I knew I was going to be a professional musician. I didn't care what anyone else had to say about it. And I wanted to spend 100% of my energy doing that. So anything else that I had to do in school, I saw as just like a major obstacle that was getting in the way of the thing that I knew that I was meant to do. So,
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I was the same way too. I had that kind of same mentality as well. I feel like if someone would put a little bit of attention to me and actually try, I felt like I did good in a specific class. But in most, I just same attitude. Just
Shout out to the teachers.
yeah, I agree,
Well,
and I
yeah.
agree with what you said. You said as well. I feel like if you go to college to be a teacher, I mean, you're spending a lot of time and money to be able to do that profession, and I mean, you know that you're not gonna make like the most money, right? So I feel like it has to be because of passion, and then I don't know. I feel like you get a rude awakening when you become a teacher. Dude, I was hearing of like teachers having to buy like their own school supplies
yeah.
for students and just some crazy shit like that I mean
You see it at all different levels.
now I mean they were pushing like classes of like 40 students to a teacher, so it's like can you really teach 40 people at the same time like productively? I mean it's hard, and I feel like it just builds up like you were saying.
Because my sister's, she's like, oh, we had a new teacher. She just graduated, she's really motivated. And she said that she couldn't really handle it because she thought it was going to be different, and she just left, and it's just, she was
sad.
only there for like a year or less, but it's I don't know.
Well,
It's different,
it's a symptom of a bigger part of the problems in our societies. Like, and we saw this here just recently in the Salem Kaiser district, where the teachers almost went on strike, and the people in charge were saying, "Oh, well, we only have so much in the budget, and we're giving you as much as we can." And I remember thinking, like, okay, how much of the money is going to teachers and how much is going to administrators? People that just have these kind of new made up kind of jobs that is basically made of constantly moving the goalposts of what the new rules are, as far as like what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, a lot of like politically correct kind of stuff. And I think a lot of money is wasted on administration, people that don't have any direct contact with the kids, versus hiring more teachers, hiring more counselors, hiring more nurses. They really need more nurses. But there's a political aspect of this where a lot of the money gets lost in these new programs that are basically just made up of this is what you're not allowed to say anymore, and if you do, we're going to destroy you.
I think that's
a
what,
good
yeah.
point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
And if you dare say anything about it, you can be destroyed.
Literally.
And I've been starting to speak more openly about my own beliefs on societal things and political things too, because I do the deathbed test, which is I imagine myself on my deathbed as an old man, and I think to myself, what would I regret? And I can think of two things. Number one is if I didn't pursue my passion of music and the attempt of making as many great albums as I possibly can, I could not die a happy man. It's like if I do everything I can to make as many great albums as I possibly can and really do my best and know that I truly tried, like I can pass the deathbed test. Number two is that if I feel that I was too much of a coward to speak my mind because I was being bullied by certain elements in our society that say you're not allowed to speak against, the said narrative, I could not die a happy man. And I'm starting to speak my mind more about things like we were just talking about in the school system, about what's happening out on the streets in Salem. I don't like what I see out on the streets as far as, and we'll go with the term houseless, but the way that that's being handled, I think, is completely backwards. The word compassion has been weaponized to mean like the opposite of what it actually means. I don't think there's anything compassionate about allowing someone to commit a slow suicide on the street while we all watch. I also don't think it's the right move to give people free housing when this kind of behavior is going on. I'm in favor of a shelter first policy that will get people under a roof and give them the basic dignity and needs they have to have a chance to turn their lives around. But the idea of getting like a free apartment is that's just another symptom of like a culture in decay. We have people defecating on the street, urinating on the street, walking around having psychotic, drug-induced episodes that scare people from coming downtown. And when I say this stuff out loud, most people agree, but then there's some people that really, they call you an asshole or some kind of variation of that. And it's like, okay, fine, I'm an asshole, but it's like, I refuse to accept that this should be the standard of what we allow on our streets. And similarly, like I go and do talks at schools, and they bring me in to talk about being a professional musician. They bring me in to talk about being a recovering alcoholic. And what I see, the kind of behavior that's allowed by some of the students now, like when we were kids, you would not be allowed to behave the way that a lot of the students do. You just casually like saying the F word, for example.
Oh, is that allowed now?
I guess, yeah.
Oh,
It's like
wow.
I've seen it many times, and like, you weren't allowed to do that, 20 years ago. And it's like, why? And again, it's this this promotion of victimhood culture and making it so that the kids are not dumb either. I know, like when I was a kid, if we had the current rules in school, like me and my friends would have like made a field day out of finding ways to exploit it and just like, be unbelievable assholes in our high school, which we did anyways. But there was like we had much more limitations. But the things that you're seeing allowed in the schools, and that's part of what makes the teachers' jobs impossible.
Yep.
It's like if you're not allowed to discipline a kid for bad behavior, like what chance does a teacher stand? Like they're not even in the frame of like, oh, I'm losing my passion for teaching. It's more like several of my students are drug addicts, or like I'm afraid that this kid might like violently like beat me up and I can't do anything about it. That's like the how far we have fallen as a culture, just because we've reduced our standards so low to allow any kind of behavior, and it's usually rooted in some kind of claiming of victimhood that we allow for this kind of really bad behavior.
So let's go ahead.
No, I think so. I think that's what it is, because I've heard, obviously, I know people, and it's they say it's really hard to do anything. Like the kids pretty much run the school at this point, and it's hard because social media. Back then, if people were smoking, not what is it? What are the vape pens, or what is it called? Like cannabis pens. Mm-hmm. Now you could have them. No one, you can't tell, you can't smell it. People in the movie theaters do it. You see people doing it around, but you can't smell it. So it's even harder in school if they have them.
Yeah.
They say it's kind of like it's pretty wild. But yeah, and then it's they have the whole like day, or what do you call it? Day.
Huh? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very tough because they gotta watch they're kind of like tiptoeing on everything basically. Which is a little different, because it's like, damn, when I was there, it was like it was different for sure.
And I think, I mean, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think that a lot of the money that is wasted on administration type jobs these are the people that are implementing like these new philosophies and rules that seem to just be made up from week to week, where it's like, oh, now if you say this, that thing that you used to say like 2 weeks ago, now if you say that, that's like a fireable offense. And how can you operate in a environment where the goalposts are changing constantly?
Exactly.
And it's not rooted in anything that's real. It's just a lot of it's just made up.
It's just political. It's just they're moving the money. Saeed was telling me that they're gonna release 400 people from the school district.
I saw that.
And he's worried about his job. He's like, dude, I only been there for 3 years. And I was like, dude, you'll be fine. You do bilingual. They don't have bilingual there. It's like, oh, still, dude, they're doing seniority. You know the. I was like, but 400 school district.
That's a lot.
Because he's hired by the school district, not through the actual school. So the school doesn't have a say in this.
I have a friend who works for the state and pretty high up too. And I asked him, it's like, if you were to either, let's say, like fire or remove jobs of people that are either like not contributing anything to our city or actively making things worse, like how much of our like city staff or city jobs, government jobs, could we just like completely cut and not have any loss? And in fact, perhaps it's an improvement. He was like, probably like 30%.
Yeah, no, I believe
So,
it.
yeah, if we could have a leader that had the boldness to speak the truth to these issues and say, well, maybe like a third of our government officials need to be fired.
I believe that. Not only that, but it's just they just waste money.
Oh,
My wife used to work for the county, and she was part of the department where they worked and approved grants. And she was telling me about how much these people are charging like the community for these grants. Like they're like, for like translation, they're like charging them like over $100 an hour, like something like just ridiculous. And the every department would get a certain amount of money every year, and it was if you don't use it, you're gonna get less money next year than what you actually used. So at this point, it's just
Right.
like we're just buying brand new everything, even if we don't need it, just because next year we may get a bigger budget just because we used it all. So it's that or nothing. It's just really bad. It's really bad. Incentivized really badly, I think.
It's really infuriating because if we had an honest system, then we could probably like double every teacher's pay while expecting like really good results. Like we could pay police officers more while expecting better results. It's like make teachers and police officers be like really highly sought after jobs because they pay really well, but also have like really high standards to be able to get those jobs because they pay really well. And then the results you would see would be much better. And I think the money is there if we had an honest government, but I know that that's just like a very naive, childish thought, an honest government. But it's interesting to see how that can happen even on the local level. I mean, there's a race for mayor going on right now, and I was watching the debate, and Julie Hoy, who's challenging the current mayor, she said that she got a copy of the budget, which is like $750 million in Salem, and she had an accountant look through it and almost immediately found like a $1 million error, like $1 million, mistake. Anyone else makes a mistake that costs $1 million, like you would at least get fired.
Yeah.
What was that
That's
$1 million
huge.
mistake for?
I didn't get the details on that.
But was it like overcharging, or was it like I don't know how to ask this question, I guess.
I know where you're getting at, but it's like I don't know the details of that. But she's claiming that there was a discrepancy that was to the tune of like $1 million. But then other things too, like very wasteful things, and to the tune of several hundreds of thousands of dollars for like mailing out certain things.
Wasteful things.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Yeah.
So you add all that stuff up, and then you start to nickel and dime. Like our teachers who were tasked with such a really difficult job, like teaching kids in such a difficult environment. It's just the whole thing is upside down. And it's the worst of it, I think, is shown on what happens on the street, where we have people who are, like I said, just actively committing a slow suicide right in front of our eyes. And for the people that will try to claim that I don't have a big enough heart for these people, I just say, like, I know what they're going through better than most, because I was a really low bottom alcoholic. I nearly lost my life multiple times. The last year of my drinking, I would wake up every day coughing up blood. The last year of my drinking, I had multiple episodes where I bled out multiple times. If you don't know what that means, go ahead and Google it and imagine what that's like. So I see people out on the street. It's heartbreaking. I know that they're in hell, but I also know that they can get out, because I know many, many people in Salem, and there's millions of people all over the world who have escaped the hell of addiction, who have been able to get help for severe mental illness. and it's not helped by the current system of just simply allowing them to commit this behavior out on the street and just assuming that they're hopeless and that nothing can be done. I think the true compassionate thing to do is to say, it's because we see you as human beings that we demand more of you. We demand that you do what you need to do to be able to turn your life around. And we want to help you do these things too. We want to offer you these services, but you have to play a part in your own recovery. And then you can contribute to our society. And I really want to see that, but the current system is just to basically say, oh, they're victims, they can't help it, and we need to be sympathetic to their behavior. But I think we should really take a hard look at what we're doing and raise our standards and have some new rules. Yeah.
What part did you have to put in order for you to change your path into sobriety?
I had to show up and do the work. When I finally hit bottom and threw in the towel, I went to a recovery meeting. I don't say the specific program, but there's a lot of different 12-step programs out there. And I went to a meeting and I immediately started doing the work. I got a sponsor. I started doing the step work. And the thing that happens in recovery meetings is that when someone new comes in and they are showing a real willingness to do the work, they will almost immediately be surrounded by people who have been through it that will try to help them. That happens all the time. And that's what happened with me. I went into my first recovery meeting. I started going regularly, and I was surrounded by people who were willing to help however they could. They were giving me rides to places. They were helping me through the program. I got a tremendous amount of help just from other recovering alcoholics, because that's what step 12 is to spread the message of recovery to other alcoholics and to help them. That's what I'm attempting to do with my music, is to do basically like a global 12th step, so that people that are in that same hell, they can look at me as an example or anyone else that's been through it, but say like, wow, this guy's like me and he was able to turn it around. And I see the people out on the street and they're suffering, and I think to myself, like, I'm just like that guy. But I also know what doesn't work, and just allowing them to continue on with that behavior with no real consequences is it's a death sentence for a lot of them.
I know that you were saying earlier that you went through several like almost death experiences. So what was it that changed your mind that morning that made you want to go to a meeting?
I had a bunch of those. Well, the last year of my life was basically on the verge of death. And it was a night that I went out, and I was at a local Salem bar, and I had been drinking very, very heavily, and my whole body just shut down. I was never a blackout drinker, which was interesting because like I was hardcore, drinking 30 to 35 drinks a day by the end. But I wouldn't black out. And this one night, my whole body shut down, but my mind was still working. I couldn't move. I was basically paralyzed, and I was out on the street in front of a local Salem bar. And I'll never forget the look on people's faces as they walked by and looked at me with just like that look of disgust. And it's just like, this, like, just looking at me just like I was just this pathetic individual. And I had just sunken so low. And I remember looking over and seeing another poor soul out there passed out on the street, like we see all the time. It's like a normal thing in Salem, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember laying there and looking over and seeing another guy that was in the same condition. And I said to myself, like, oh my God, like I'm one of these guys now. Like, you've arrived, Manny. Like, you are now a guy that's passed out on the street and can't move. And people are just walking by looking at you, just like, and that's where I felt what we call the incomprehensible demoralization. And on top of all of the incredibly scary health episodes I was having with like the internal bleeding and everything, it was actually like that public humiliation that finally put me over the edge. And it was just time. I knew that I had to do it, or that I was going to die. And I decided that I wanted to live. And once I decided that I wanted to live, I kind of just made a logical choice, which was, if I am to live, what kind of life is worth living and staying sober for? And to me, it was like, well, I got to go for the boyhood dream of, having the Pink Floyd kind of band that changes people's lives. But there's been all kinds of twists and turns along the way of all kinds of different people coming into my life, different opportunities, getting more into public speaking, which I'm doing like right now, and at schools and on the radio and stuff. And it's like, it's all developing in a way that's beyond what I ever would have dreamed of initially. And it's turning out that BOH and Birth of Happiness, the band, is just one part of something that's much bigger. And it's an interesting spot right now because I understand that I'm tasked with saying things out loud that are difficult to say and that carry heavy weight. Even just in this interview right now, talking about my stance on like what's going on in schools and what's going out on the street. It's like, it's an unpopular opinion amongst some, but at the same time, a lot of people pull me aside and they're just like, yes, like, thank you for saying that. And again, it's just the deathbed test, man. Like I can't go on any longer without speaking my mind. I refuse to be bullied into silence. So here I am.
There was one of your songs, you speak about death a lot, and there was one of your songs, I think it was titled Not Afraid to Die or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that the title?
Yep, Not Afraid to Die, yeah.
You said that you had a lot of near-death experiences. How can you talk about the time that you were closest to death?
I would say the bleeding out, that happened like 4 different times. And since this is an uncensored kind of podcast for people that don't know, I'll just describe what that's like. And it's a good fear persuasion for people to not allow themselves to go as far down as I did. And for the last year or year and a half of my drinking, and again, I was drinking something like 30 to 35 drinks a day. I could drink a liter of hard alcohol pretty easily. On like my really hardcore nights, I could drink 2/3 of a gallon of like whiskey or rum. So that kind of thing takes a toll on your body, after years of doing that and building a tolerance that allows you to even physically be able to drink that much alcohol. So for the last year to year and a half, I would wake up every day and I would cough up blood. And that's a clear indicator that something is wrong. If you're coughing up blood, it's like you're doing something wrong in life. But then there was a couple of episodes where I would wake up and I would feel a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach like this. It wasn't so much pain. It was just like this extreme discomfort, gurgling, just like something is very, very wrong. You run into the bathroom and you do what we all do in the bathroom. And then, you go to clean yourself and you pull back a hand that's just covered in blood. So that's bleeding out. And the first time that happened, I think that was a moment that was definitely a moment that I'll never forget. But each time that happened, you're on the verge of death. You can Google it and it'll tell you like you have to go to the hospital immediately because you're dealing with something that can be fatal. And just imagine what an undignified, like pathetic way of dying, like that. And that almost happened, that event happened to me several times. Just one of those is enough to kill a person. So the fact that I'm here alive, and not only that, but in great health, is miraculous. And so I would say that was the closest that I had been to death. And the things that were just going on in my mind with like the insanity that's associated with that level of addiction. I mean, that was as scary or even scarier than the blood thing. And when I was 80 days sober, that's when I went to my doctor and came clean. And and said, all right, doctor, like ever since you've known me, I've been lying to you, basically. So here's the deal. I'm an alcoholic. I'm 80 days into recovery, and I need to know how much damage I've done to myself. So he ran all the appropriate tests, and I got to wait that really fun 2 weeks of waiting for the test results to come back, and I'm gaming it in my mind, all the different scenarios that could happen. Am I going to need a liver transplant or a kidney transplant? Have I done permanent damage to myself? And I get the call a week or two later, and they said that all my levels were in normal range. And I'm telling you, man, I fell to my knees and I thanked God. And to this day, I think to myself often that I've won the ultimate jackpot in life. There's people who win the Powerball for $1 billion, and that's great. But that doesn't compare to what I got, to have a clean bill of health after all that. So that's why I have the mentality that I do, because I should be dead, and I feel very strongly that God not only pulled me out of hell, but he pulled me out of hell and said, I've got something I need you to do. And that's what drives me.
That's awesome.
So when you come across a guy who was in hell and came face to face with death, and he truly believes that God pulled him out and gave him a purpose, you don't bet against that guy.
No, I was just curious because I've seen some interviews of people that have been in near-death situations, and death is just a really interesting subject to me. So I'm just just wanted to know their mental state. And
yeah, I didn't have a see a light or anything.
So it's that's the common thing people will say. Oh, did you see the light? Or
but I definitely had experiences where I experienced I would just call it extreme darkness, on a spiritual level.
Did that scare you?
Sure.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can. I try not to live in fear these days, but in the rare moments where a thought of drinking comes through my mind, and it happens because we live in an alcohol fueled society. And I go out and I play music and I'm around alcohol all the time. It generally doesn't bother me, but the time that it can, let's say, trigger me is if I'm watching a film like John Wick that I love, where you have a character that has all these awesome skills and he's running around doing all this cool shit, and and then he takes one drink of whiskey and puts it down and walks away. And I'm just oh man, that looked cool. But I have a motto for my step one, and step one is admitting that you're powerless over alcohol and your life has become unmanageable. The second that the darkness creeps in and the demon kind of starts whispering, I say, remember the blood. Remember the blood is my step one motto. So yeah, I did have some scary experiences, and it's stuff that I generally don't even really talk about that much in public, because when you start to delve into the spiritual side of things, you can kind of lose a lot of people and they just call you crazy and stuff. But let's just say that I'm a very spiritual person, and there's certainly a dark side, and I experienced it in a very personal way. Yeah. And I am very, very happy to be on the other side of that, fighting against it now.
Yeah, dang. What was your doctor's reaction when you told him you were drinking about 35 drinks a day?
That's a great question, because he when I went in and came clean with him, and he started asking me some pretty scary questions, because I told him the truth. And that's one of the things about recovery is rigorous honesty. If you want to recover, you have to be rigorously honest and completely willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. So I told him the truth. I told him how much I was drinking. I said, yeah, man, I'm hardcore. He's like, okay, well, I got to ask these questions. Number one, when you look at people's faces, can you do you know who you're talking to? So you're asking more brain questions at first, is your brain still working, kind of deal. And then he gets into the physical, and he asks if I'd ever had a bleeding episode. I'm oh yeah, that's happened several times. And he goes, oh, and he starts checking a bunch of boxes of tests that he has to run. And that was the most reaction that he had. It's a lot of doctors are kind of not emotional like that. But the really cool moment was like after that 80 days, and I go and I get a clean bill of health, and he tells me, you know, it's like basically just keep your shit together so that you don't die, you know, essentially. And I go back a year later because when I went to see him, I was over 300 pounds. You know, I tipped the scales at like 306 at that point, and I ended up losing over 100 pounds. And I went in to see him like a year later, and I'm sitting there, and he kind of walks in, and it looked like he had been having like a difficult conversation with someone else. He's like not really paying attention to me or whatever. He walks in, he gets on the computer, he looks at the chart, and he looks at me. He goes, like, this can't be right. Like, wait a second, like, who are you? And it's like, because I had completely transformed physically. Like, he didn't know who I was. And I explained, I'm like, yeah, man, like, remember I was here like a year ago, and it's like I lost like 100 pounds, and he was just like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like he just went on to tell me that like he never sees that. Generally, when he's dealing with patients, it's prescribing a pill to mask whatever their problem is. So it's not very often that doctors see someone that just like does a total 180 and transforms like that. And then he also went on a rant, which was kind of interesting, where he talked about how he thought that one of the biggest mistakes that the country has ever made was ending prohibition. He was just like, we got that completely wrong. We should have just kept alcohol illegal. Alcohol. It's like he was just like going nuts about like how we should have kept prohibition. And it's like I don't even know how I feel about that now, but that was an interesting perspective coming from a doctor, especially. But it makes sense because I mean, God, you think about how much damage alcohol does in our culture. You look at the link between violent crimes and how often someone is under the influence of alcohol when a violent crime happens. And I just think of my own experience of people contacting me about either their own drinking problems or the problems that someone else has. I mean, alcohol is a vicious, deadly, horrible drug that's completely normalized and sometimes celebrated in our culture, especially in the rock and roll world. Yeah, you know, so we're trying to make it like, you know, cool to be sober, basically.
Yeah.
Do you ever lie to your doctor when he asks you how many drinks you have? You go to the doctor all the time. No. You always honest with them?
Yeah.
What do you say? I definitely
well,
lie.
it tells you every time you go for a checkup, like your physical, they tell you to.
Oh, you fill it out yourself?
Well, yeah. Well, it's kind of like I don't know what you call it, the first.
Yeah.
It's like, do you drink? Yes. How many drinks? I think a week or a day.
I think it's a day, and then also
I don't remember
or something like
I don't
that.
remember.
Oh, so what do you put when you say weekly drinks?
Well, I drink weekly.
But I know, but what do you put for how many weekly drinks?
I don't know. I don't drink too much, but I mean, I can't handle. I mean, 35. That's I can't handle, dude. I don't know, dude. I just 10.
You put 10 a week?
Yeah, or less. Cause I don't. I'm not a drinker. Like if it's like you. If I have a 6-pack at home or 12, I don't drink. If someone comes over to the house, socialize, then I'll have a few beers with them. But I could have a 24-pack in the fridge, and it'll stay in the fridge. I don't touch it, or my wife. People come over, okay, well, we'll have drinks. That's how I drink, socialize.
Yeah, that's very normal.
Yeah.
You're what we call a normie.
Oh.
I went to the doctor for first time since I got out of high school. And like a couple months ago, I told you about that, no?
I don't know.
Just for a normal checkup. And the doctor was filling the sheet out for me. So he asked me, he's like, oh, do you drink daily? And I'm like, no. He's like, do you drink weekly? And I'm like, yeah, we drink weekly. And he's like, how many drinks would you say? And then I started doing the math, and I'm like, well, I only drink, but he didn't ask me how many, he asked me week. And I'm like, well, I only drink once a week, but I mean, we're probably knocking down 12, 14 beers if we're drinking Saturday and Sunday. So I was like, should I tell him 14? And then I'm like, nah, I'm gonna lower it. And I'm like, what am I gonna say? I'm like, I'm gonna say 8. Okay, I'm gonna say 8. And I said, oh yeah, I mean, maybe 8 beers a week, you know, maybe. And then this motherfucker has the audacity to give me this like alcoholic pamphlet and stuff. Like, do you want to stop drinking? I'm like, dude, what's the right answer here? I'm like, there is no right or wrong answer here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
And it's like, I don't want to lie, but it's like we don't drink every weekend, but when we do drink,
yeah, and it depends.
Like,
it depends on what you're drinking too. I mean, there's a difference between drinking 4 to 8 like Coors Light versus
8 shots of tequila or something.
Yeah. So there's a lot of nuance to that question.
I see. Yeah, because we don't like liquor, like alcohol. I don't think we drink that, huh?
None, hardly. Maybe once a year. if that.
Celebrity shot with someone that we haven't seen in a while, but
Yeah. So it's don't get me wrong. It's not my goal to come on here and be like, no one should drink ever. Like we need to ban alcohol. It's like I'm not about that. And it's like I'm a musician. You know, I'm around alcohol all the time. There's guys in my band who are normal drinkers like you guys, and they'll have beers when we're playing gigs, and they have like 2 beers and they stop. And I'm always fascinated to watch that because like I can't, my brain doesn't process how someone drinks 2 beers and stops. And people ask me, people that don't really understand alcoholism will say like, well, can't you only just have one? I'm just like, you don't understand. It's like, it's not that I can't only have one. It's like, I don't see the point in only having one.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if I'm drinking 100% of the time. It's like, and that's how an alcoholic is. So it's always amazing, and it's funny too, especially in Oregon. And this is like an East Coast versus West Coast kind of thing too. Like in Oregon, you have guys who are like, yeah, man, like this IPA was made with like the hops that were blended with apricots and stuff. I'm just like, I don't fucking care, man. It's like, is there alcohol in that or not? It's like, and
it's hoppy.
Shout out to our friend.
You know who you are.
So it is kind of funny to watch like normal people drink, and especially like when I got into the dating world as a sober person, that's always fun. If there's ever a movie about my life, the part where Manny starts dating is going to be a really funny part of the movie because like you have these scenes where I'm at dinner with a lady and she gets like a drink, you know, like one of those fruity kind of like vodka drinks or whatever, and she's like sipping on it, and it's like she only drinks like half of it, and I'm just like I'm trying to engage in the conversation. I'm just like, you're not gonna finish that? Like, how do you not finish that? There's still booze left in there, man. Like it's just amazing, But from what it's worth, from my level of expertise on this, like I'm not worried about you guys. Just saying that, so, yeah.
There we go. See, I didn't need that, doc. I didn't need that sheet, doc.
But if it turns into a problem, you can always reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Earlier, we were talking about homelessness, and you were kind of vaguely, you kind of told us your thoughts on it here in town. But you were saying that a lot of people disagree with your opinion. I'm just curious, what part of what you were saying do they disagree with?
Well, the interesting thing is that when you get into the real substance of the argument, that generally people agree. However, the initial conversation is difficult to have because if you offer anything other than an opinion of pure, like, you know, pity and what is seen as complete blanket compassion, as like, for example, that we need to do everything we can to give them everything that they need as far as like free housing and free money and these kind of things, then you're seen as lacking compassion and that you're just like being mean to people who are downtrodden and victimized. And to be clear, I'll be the first to recognize that most people that are suffering from addiction, and especially the people that are out on the street, they are legitimate victims of some kind of terrible trauma. 99% of people in recovery likely are dealing with some kind of legitimate, horrible trauma that has happened to them where they have been victimized, and it's a terrible thing. However, it does a person no good to have a forever label of a victim and not be allowed to transcend that. So the people that will initially oppose someone that speaks the way that I do on this issue is seeing the people out on the street purely as victims, and they're seeing me as someone that's like being like kind of like too harsh to them and being mean and therefore not compassionate, right? And I sort of get that, but then when we get into the weeds of the conversation and I say like, where's the compassion in just allowing them to engage in this destructive behavior? That's not only is it not good for us in the city, it's not good for the individual either. This is a everyone loses situation. And once we get into the nuance of that, then we find a lot of common ground. But it's the broader problem that we have in our society of, you know, the oppressed versus the oppressors narrative that plays itself out over and over again. And the people on the street that are experiencing homelessness are seen as oppressed, and anyone that takes issue with them is generally seen as an oppressor of sorts. But once you actually have the conversation, I can say to an individual that might disagree, well, look, again, my view of being compassionate to these people is to say, I see them as human beings, and that's why I demand more of them. And I also see myself in them, and I know because millions of other people have recovered from this state, whether it's addiction or severe mental illness. And the severely mentally ill is like a separate category, and that's like a separate conversation. But a lot of the people that we have out there is a drug and alcohol problem. And in some cases, it's just a lifestyle choice problem, because that's another thing that's unpopular to say. And I know this because you can hear interviews with people, and I've had conversations with some of these people that they say, like, I'm out here because, like, I just want to do drugs and not have to have any responsibility. So I'm going to live on the street and do whatever the hell I want, and I don't want to participate in the system. So there is a certain element of lifestyle choice for some, and then there's others who have severe addiction, mental health issues. And then, of course, there's the example I always use of, like, the single mom who is escaping an abusive spouse. And technically she's homeless because she's escaped her home where she's being, abused terribly. And I think we all agree that someone in that category of homeless, like, we want to help that person, right? Absolutely. I'm all for that. But what I take issue with is when I'm walking around in Salem and people are afraid to go downtown because of the behavior that we all see from so many individuals that are, just walking around screaming at people. I've seen people physically attacked by people that are in these drug-induced psychotic episodes. Again, it's like using the street as a public toilet, and you get pushback on every single one of these issues. Like, well, they don't have a bathroom, like they can't go anywhere else. It's like, well, does it have to be the middle of the sidewalk? It's like, can there be at least like enough wherewithal to do it like in an alley or something? It's like doing it right in the middle of the sidewalk is like a clear like act of, transgression against the city, So I am against the idea of infantilizing adult human beings that do have some decision-making mechanism. And I want to have a real conversation about new standards that we can implement. And the Supreme Court, I think it was just last week, heard a case out of Grants Pass where they were discussing exactly this, because there's law that is relevant to this, obviously. And people ask, like, well, what could we do? And that's a great question, because it's easy for me to just sit here and rant. It's like, damn it, like, I'm tired of this shit and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, what could we do realistically? And I listened to the Supreme Court arguments from both sides of the case, because this case was brought from Grants Pass, where they tried imposing these really strict homeless shelter, these public camping laws. And it went to the Ninth Circuit, which is one of like the 9 big courts that comes underneath the Supreme Court. And then at the Ninth Circuit, they decided that to remove people from the street if they don't have adequate shelter is seen as cruel and unusual punishment, which is against the Constitution, right? So this went up to the Supreme Court, and I was listening to the arguments from both sides, and it was fascinating to listen to, because they were discussing all the things that we're talking about right now at the Supreme Court level and just giving hypotheticals. Well, what if we did this? What if we did that? And the thing that I came away with learning is that under the current law, even with like the strict judgment of the Ninth Circuit, if it was to stand, it's like there's still implementation of standards that can be met under time, place, and manner, meaning we could potentially impose a time limit that you can sleep on the street. For example, it could be from like 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. You're allowed to sleep on the street, but those other hours you're not, and it's punishable by law. Place, there could be certain areas where you're allowed to do it, and it doesn't have to be all over the city. It's like these are some practical things that perhaps could be discussed in order to be able to alleviate some of the difficulties that business owners here have when they show up to their business and there's someone sleeping in their doorway. Make it so that at a certain time of the day that's not allowed, so that business can operate here in Salem from 9 a.m. to to 9 p.m. without, as much of this problem. And then more people will come downtown, more money is spent, more revenue comes in, we can pay our teachers more. This sounds like common sense stuff. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but
Is that what they came up with? That they said that they think that there should be some time in place for them to be able to sleep, and then they have to leave at a certain time? Is that what they decided?
it's not what they decided, but it was something that they were talking about in the Supreme Court discussions as far as things. And this was coming from the side that was arguing in favor of the Ninth Circuit decision that saw it as cruel and unusual punishment. They were saying like, hey, we're not in favor of you just banning it outright, but you do have under this decision certain things that you can enforce, including time, place, and manner. So the people that were on the side of the homeless were the ones that were saying like, hey, we are giving you these tools to be able to create restrictions, but you can't just ban it outright unless there is enough proper sheltering for people, which is why I said at the beginning that I'm in favor of a shelter first program, not housing first. And I want to circle back to that in a second too, the housing first thing and why it doesn't work. But if we were to have in Salem a building or a place that had enough shelters for all of the houseless, then you could enforce a total ban as long as they had somewhere to go that was acceptable by the state. Somewhere with beds and showering facilities and these kind of things. So we could potentially build a place where people could go for shelter and then have a total ban on public camping. But you have to have a place like that. But if you don't have a place like that, that's where you can have the time, place, and manner restrictions. And just to circle back to the housing first thing, I live in an apartment complex where there have been 2 different cases where a previously houseless person was placed in one of the units in my building, and it had very, very bad results. Because if you take a person that is out on the street and suffering from addiction and mental health, and they're not rehabilitated, and you just plug them into an apartment complex with a bunch of other people who are just working people, what does that individual do all day? Well, I witnessed this with my own eyes. It's like they go out on the street and spend the day doing what they were doing before. They can still come home at night and have a place to sleep, and that seems like a good thing. But they were bringing people from the street into their apartment to do drugs and creating a very, very major problem for me and the other people that were in this apartment complex that were working jobs, paying rent. And then these individuals are placed in there, and then you go to the laundry room to do laundry, and there's like a strange person down there, and they don't live in the building, and it created all kinds of really, really bad problems. Housing should be something that is a goal for a lot of these people, but it needs to be earned. And one of the things that happens in recovery is that you earn your dignity back. You earn it through hard work. And if you just gift people housing and gift them free money, they won't be able to partake in that in their recovery process and getting their dignity back and learning how to work and contribute. So shelters, yes, but free housing, no.
What's your thought on the time and place?
For what?
Just if them being only allowed to camp out during certain times and having to leave after certain times.
That's tough. I mean, I get it though. Like, if you have a business downtown, you're there and they're sleeping. When we used to work, it wasn't even our business, but when we worked at Verizon, it's like sometimes you would get there and they were just sleeping there. They wouldn't leave. You would have to call the cops to leave. And you're not being a dick. It's just like, dude, what are you doing here? It's business hours. Get out. And they wouldn't get out. Or they would leave a mess, or they would just kind of like puke all over the place. And we would always have to call the cops. That wasn't my business. Now imagine having, your local business downtown. I don't know, dude. I mean, I get it, but, question, is the Union Gospel Mission, is that a shelter or what is that? The new building?
Yeah, the Union Gospel Mission is a great place, and they not only offer shelter, but a program to be able to really turn your life around where you can get an ID and have a mailing address. And I know some guys who have gone there and utilized all the resources that they have. It's a wonderful place. But the thing about the UGM is that it's a religious affiliated institution. So it doesn't count for the state because like the state's not allowed to have like something that's religious, right? Which is understandable. Again, there's a separation between church and state. Like you can't force someone to go into a shelter that's like a Christian shelter if they're not Christian, So, but if you were to have a state sponsored place like the UGM that had adequate space and resources with enough room for everyone that needed it, then you could have much tougher, laws and rules on the books. And again, I'm completely in favor of having it be the long-term goal in Salem for us to have what was they've done this in Scandinavian countries and other places where the resources are available, and there's a lot of social workers that are employed in this field where individuals are placed in like a state sponsored kind of UGM kind of place that's not religious, right? And they are allowed all of the resources needed to recover, but then there's accountability. They have to show a certain amount of responsibility and willingness to do the work, and that allows them to be able to have tougher rules on the streets about what's allowed. But that's part of the problem we have in Salem is that, and in Portland and across the entire West Coast really, is that we don't have the services that are needed to be able to get these people the initial shelters that they need. So I'd be in favor of that. I'd like to see like a large piece of land bought in Salem and a large recovery center with shelters built where people could go. I'd love to see Salem be the place where people come to get better. That's like a dream of mine, really. So again, the people on the street, like I genuinely want to see them get better and see the before and after pictures.
Why do you think that doesn't happen? I've heard, I don't know how true this is. Obviously, there's a lot of things that go on or people say on the internet, but and I don't go into deep with the conversation, but they've always said that it benefits the city or the government or the state to have homeless. There is money involved.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where the money is involved. People don't know, but there is some money that someone's making. I don't know how. Like, why is it that there's not a lot of help?
Well, what you're talking about is something that I'm starting to educate myself a little bit more on. Some people call it like the homeless industrial complex. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of nonprofits that have sprouted up regarding this issue where they will, for example, provide tents for people to be sleeping out, and they provide them with needles and basically all the things that a person would need to live outside. So there's nonprofit organizations that raise money in order to facilitate the behavior that I'm talking about. So there's people making money off of this. It's become a business.
Yeah.
And that is a major problem and a major part of this entire discussion. Yes.
They also supply them with Narcans. Have you seen those? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they supply them.
Expensive?
I don't know. But there was like the nonprofit organizations, but I don't know. I've seen a few things about these, and it's just different, dude. It's kind of tough, but it's kind of like you're gonna go in the rabbit. You like going in the rabbit hole, dude. Look into that.
It's tricky. My feeling is because I am optimistic and I'm always shooting for like a big goal. I feel like Salem is not such a big place where we couldn't get our hands around this. I mean, I think Portland has a much bigger problem, much bigger city, and the issue is much more widespread. But Salem here, things have not gotten so out of hand that we couldn't turn this around. But there would also need to be a clear indication that not only are we going to do what we need to do to help these people and raise our standards, but we're not going to allow this to happen anymore. This is the place where people come to get better. This is not the place where you can come and do this outside. Like, you'll have to go somewhere else if you want to do that, to a different town. So on a local level, I think there is a chance that if the community got fired up about this enough with the right leadership, that it could be turned around. But whether or not that can happen nationwide, that's a really tricky question. And you're right, it's a big rabbit hole when you start to ask, like, why is this happening? It's it's so clearly wrong. I don't think there's anyone that can look at that situation and be like, yeah, this is great. It's not like a lot of the other political issues we have in the country where there's just like two different sides, and I can see the argument on both sides of certain things that are really contentious. But this is one where I don't think there's anyone that says like, yeah, I like the fact that there's people doing this. Like no one likes it, and it also didn't used to exist either. Like this is a fairly new thing. Like there's always been homeless and really poor people for the entire human history, right? But what we see with like the tent cities and especially the behavior, that's as a result of like new, more powerful drugs like fentanyl and meth. That meth especially is the stuff that makes people act like completely insane on the street. Like when you see the people, screaming in what seems to be nothing, even though like from their viewpoint, like they're talking to someone, But the people that are addicted to meth are engaged in a lot of like the really bad behavior you see on the street. The fentanyl is killing a lot of people. These are newer things, and it wasn't like this, 30, 40 years ago. So I really want to see people wake up to the fact that this is a kind of like a new thing that we have allowed, and we could potentially say like we're not going to allow this anymore. And it would be the most compassionate thing for the people involved because they're dying, and if they're not dying, they're living in their own filth in a completely undignified living hell. And the fact of the matter is like sometimes you need to be tough with people in order to get them to turn their lives around. And it's affecting a lot of other people in a really negative way. It's like why should everyone else in Salem have to be victimized by this terrible behavior?
We got kind of wrapped up into all of this, but you went to Western.
No, that was my plan. I was planning on getting my master's degree in guitar and or music. My plan when I first came here was that I was going to get a master's and then become a college professor in music. Okay. That's what I thought that I was going to do, but things went differently. These days I have a studio where I teach private guitar lessons. Nice. And that's like my main day job kind of deal, along with playing gigs. But yeah, that's why I initially came out here was to get a master's degree, but I didn't get it.
Where do you teach? Here in Salem?
Yeah, I have a studio off Commercial Street, southeast over by Bush Park.
Okay.
And I have about 50 private students.
Nice.
And it's wonderful, man. It's like the people that I have studying with me, I have a really good set of people that come to me every week, and all skill levels, all ages. And it's a wonderful blessing, a wonderful way to be able to make a living. And then I have a jazz quartet as well that is, we play quite a few gigs here in Salem, and that supplements the income a little bit. And then, of course, the BOH is the attempt at the $1 million song. It's like to go for the big times. So we'll see what happens.
And you said this is the first album that you
Yeah.
come out. How difficult was it? I mean, this is really nice. How difficult was it to, get everything all this started doing? You got CDs, you got vinyls. Like, how hard was it to get everything?
It was a lot of work. That's for sure. When I went to Berkeley, there was a guy there named Brian Baker, and Brian was a prodigy, like one of those 10-year-old, 11-year-old kids that you see on the Ellen show or something. That's just like a virtuoso. I met him at Berkeley when we were teenagers. So I was like 17, he was 16. He had a full scholarship to Berkeley as a guitar player, which is almost unheard of. I didn't really know him well at all at the school. I only crossed paths with him like twice. But I was always a big fan of his, and he's a really brilliant, like Mozart-like musical mind. Fast forward years and years, and COVID hits. Right, I'm 1 year sober. COVID hits, and I'm thinking like, all right, well, like what am I gonna do? And I actually I'd been following Brian's career for a while and was a fan, and he had made a post that he was going to be doing some discounted guitar lessons as a service for COVID. And he lives in California, by the way, so this is all online. And I reached out to him mainly from a standpoint of recovery because I was always really jealous and envious of Brian. Like he seemed like I was just really envious of him. And I said, it'll be good for this early recovery of mine to reach out and see maybe if he can help me and see what happens. And that began the process of him and I working together, to this day, over 4 years now. We started just with guitar lessons. I was just like, hey, man, maybe you can show me some stuff. And then he encouraged me to get into songwriting, and we ended up writing all of this music together during COVID. So that's one of the really special parts of this record for me, is that it was co-written and co-produced by Brian Baker, who was someone that I really admired, and I never thought that I would be making music with him when I was at Berkeley. Like he was on stage, like he was the stud at Berkeley, and I was just like an average dude. So like 20 years later, the fact that we made a record together is just remarkable, and he's a really fascinating character, like a really brilliant guy. So we write all this music, and we want to record it, and it's expensive to make a record, And I was doing okay with my lessons and stuff, paying the bills, but I certainly didn't have the funds to do something like this, because making this record for the studio, paying the guys in my band, all in all, ended up being around $25,000. Which is like, it's $25,000 is one of those funny numbers where it's like it's a lot, but it's not. It's like depending on what perspective, So it was a lot for me. It still is a lot for me, but it was doable. It wasn't like $1 million or something like that. It was like, okay, I gotta put together like $25,000 just to make the thing. So I did a T-shirt campaign where we made a BOH T-shirt with the old like crude version of the logo, and we were gonna sell it for $50, and that was our fundraiser for the record. And I know at first there was a lot of people saying like, man, what the fuck are you doing? Like $50 for a T-shirt? You gotta be out of your mind. Like we ended up selling like 160 of them, and we raised like $5,000 alone just from that T-shirt campaign. And then students and people close to me, family, friends, all chipped in. It ended up raising, between people in Salem and other people in my life, I ended up raising like $19,000, and I was able to swing the rest of it myself. So that was a really humbling thing to have the community get so involved. And another really important part of this whole thing too was that after COVID, once everything opened up again, I joined the Salem Chamber of Commerce, and that's where I started really getting involved in the community and meeting my fellow business owners and entrepreneurs. I love going to the chamber. We meet every Friday morning at a different location in Salem. And these are people who are, motivated people, movers and shakers, also just very values oriented and just wonderful people. And they've played a huge part in supporting everything that I've been doing, along with, getting me more students or helping me get more students and gigs. But a lot of chamber members were the ones that were, buying the fundraiser stuff and, sharing the information and helping me to make this record a reality. Networking is huge, man. And that's something I've really learned in the last couple of years, the power of networking. That's where it's at. It's all relationships, man. Like, who do you know? Yeah. And people say in music, it's like, well, you got to know someone, right? It's all about who you know. It's like, well, yeah, but guess what? If you don't know anyone, you can go out and meet some people. Yeah. So that's what networking is, dude. You go out and find a group of people of other people that want to make things happen, and you start talking to them, and maybe you can work together, or maybe you know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that can help. So it's amazing how quickly you can get connected to literally like millions of people just through a couple of contacts. Seriously. Because you have like 1,000 friends on Facebook, or you have 1,000 people on Instagram, and they have 1,000 people, and they have 1,000 people. Before you know it, like you're connected to millions of people. And that's if you're doing something like music, that's where the game is just to get your stuff heard and seen by as many people as possible. And the networking thing is huge, not only for being able to raise the funds to get it made, but now get it listened to. So that's what the challenge is now, is getting it heard.
So you have an amazing website, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Are people able to buy this on the website?
Yeah, if you go to birthofhappiness.com, we have a store, and we have vinyl records. We have the coffee mugs, T-shirts, hoodies, CDs. We have a shipment of baseball caps coming soon, women's tank tops. And as time goes on, we'll continue to make more merchandise. Mm-hmm.
Can they buy this anywhere in person, or is it just a website right for now?
For the moment, it's just at the website. There's one record shop in Salem. The name is eluding me. I think it's called Drum Bug. It's over by the Physique Fitness downtown. So there is one local record shop that has a couple copies of these, but for the moment, I've just been shipping them out through the website. So
that's awesome. Heck yeah. Well, man, we appreciate you coming out, man. I know you have a really interesting story, and the topics that we've touched, I mean, we can go on those topics for hours.
For sure.
But no, we appreciate your time. Thank you for all the gifts that you brought. Like I said, I love the way that the vinyl looks. I think it's crisp, clean.
Yeah, and when
simple.
you open it, the record itself is white as well.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's
It's
cool.
I saw it on Instagram.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see
it's
that.
a nice packaging for sure. And just got to give a big shout out to Jason Carter over at Wavelength. He's the one that recorded this at his studio, and he helped me to get all the merchandise made, including the vinyl. He's a really wonderful guy. I wouldn't have been able to do this without his help. So to Jason Carter at Wavelength, Brian Baker, my mentor and co-writing partner, the guys in my band, I've had a tremendous amount of help. There's no doubt about that. The Chamber, people from recovery, that's a huge part of this story. It's just tons and tons of people helping me, which I'm really grateful for.
Before we end this, do you have a couple dates for your band that?
Yeah. So we're going to start playing likely in July. We have a couple of dates booked in August. You can find our calendar on birthofhappiness.com. Looks like we're going to be playing Kaiser Fest, which I think it's August 9th, the Infinity Room on September 6th. We have got a gig in Eugene, which is, I think it's called John Henry's on August 24th. And we're looking to do a big show on November 8th, which will be my 40th birthday party, by the way. It's like that.
Nice.
It's crazy to think about, at the Grand Theater in Salem. And so you can check out birthofhappiness.com to see our calendar, and we'll keep updating that as we get more dates on the calendar.
Bam. I know you gave a couple shout outs. Do you have any last things you would like to say before we?
Well, I guess for anyone out there that is suffering from addiction, just realize that you can escape that hell. You're looking at a guy right now who is in one of the deepest layers of hell from addiction and was able to escape through a recovery program and reaching out to the recovery community. And mine is not a unique story, because I'm surrounded by people all the time who also escaped that hell. And you can look all over the country and all over the world. There's millions and millions of people that have escaped the hell of addiction. And not only that, but been able to recover and have lives beyond their wildest dreams, which is why I simply can't accept the current state of what we see on the streets, because I know that it doesn't have to be that way. So I would just encourage anyone out there that's struggling, just do that initial step of reaching out for help, and you can escape that hell. Absolutely.
No, that's it. That's a wrap.
All right, very good. Thanks for having
coming
me.
in, man.